Hello, my name is Nathan Merritt, and this is my vlog. So the first question I want to answer is, what is an abolitionist? An abolitionist created a movement that started by many ordinary people to end slavery. These were just people that realized slavery was unjust and they wanted to do something about it. There were five main figures in the abolitionist movement that many people think should be heroes today, and I agree, they're heroes. William Lloyd Garrison, Angelina Grimke, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and then John Brown. The three main the ones we're going to talk about today in this vlog are going to be Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and John Brown. William Lloyd Garrison grew up in a troubled childhood. His dad was a drunk and he ran away when he was like 2 years old. And then his mom left for many years just to find work, to kind of support the family. But his mom still had a lasting impact on him and got him involved in Christian ideals. And then he wanted to have a purpose in life, and right when he learned about how awful slavery was, he wanted to abolish it. And by doing that, he created a paper called The Liberator, which was completely against slavery. And one of his most famous lines in that, he said, "I will be heard." And then Frederick Douglass, he was a former slave who, when he was 6, he witnessed his aunt being beaten really bad. And he was just sitting there watching. I can't imagine how awful that was. And then one time he got sent to be beat because he was misbehaving or wasn't doing exactly what his master was. And the guy who beat him, he fought back. And then he actually pretty much won the fight. And the guy never tried to beat him again. And then he eventually fled to a free place in the north of Massachusetts. And for the first 3 years, he worked 2 shifts a day, doing the worst of the jobs, loading ships or whatever it took to support family. And then John Brown was a really violent man. He thought the only way was to free slaves was by violence. And he was made a hero in the North and an enemy in the South. But the crazy thing is, all 3 of these guys had differing ideologies when it came to how to free slaves. They wanted free slaves, but they had different. Garrison was more of a pacifist. Douglass was kind of in the middle, and John Brown was straight violence. Whatever it took, he didn't care. And Garrison used the Liberator throughout his time trying to abolish slavery. And then Frederick Douglass, at first, he agreed with Garrison's pacifist ideas. Just through politics, we'll abolish slavery that way. But then after the Fugitive Slave Act, a big punch in the face to many abolitionists, he started thinking maybe violence was the only way to fix it. And then John Brown, he traveled down to Kansas with 4 of his sons one time, and he dragged 5 slave owners out from their cabins and brutally murdered them to death. And then he tried to overthrow Harper's Ferry, a federal arsenal in Virginia. And it didn't work. He ended up getting arrested, and many of his people got killed, and he ended up getting sentenced to the death penalty. But Frederick Douglass realized that was even a little too much. There's this certain level you had to stop at. And then it was really cool reading about how all those abolitionists helped shape our society the way it is today. And then I read the book about Harriet Jacobs. She wrote it in first person. It was really interesting. And then so she started out when she was first born. She had a good life for a slave. And she was unaware she was a slave until she was 6. Her mother ended up dying young, and her parents had different masters. So then they ended up not treating her near as well as the first master did, which she treated her great. And then she ended up having to spend in hiding with her grandmother for a little bit. And it's really hard for women who are slaves because they love their kids and they want to raise them just as any mothers do, but their masters were like completely against it. Whatever they want to do, they would sell their kids or whatever they thought would make them unhappy. Said many times slave owners would beat them and just for the fun of it, and then they would rape them all the time just because they could, and they paid no consequences for it. And then most of the time, if a married slave owner had an affair or they raped an unmarried slave, the slave would then be blamed for it. It said another struggle that Jacobs had was that slaves in that time did not have marital rights, which Jacob struggled with deeply. She wants to get married to a free black man who's willing to pay a reasonable price, but Mr. Flynn would not do that. And then it made her really upset when her second baby was a woman, because she knows how hard a woman's life is. A man's life is hard, but not near as hard as a woman. And then when she has to stay in her grandmother's shed for 7 years, everything's after her, with the bugs, hundreds of bugs, rats, and mice. It was just barely surviving for those 7 years. If it wasn't her kid, she may not have had the will to stay alive. And then another thing that she struggles with is women had no power during this time, especially black women. The men had all the power, which kind of was how it was even later, even after slavery. But luckily, she was eventually able to flee to the north and have a better life. Not a great life, but a better life. And I'm Nathan Merritt, and thank you for listening to my vlog today.